Today, as mentioned, it's Kickstart Your Kanban with Jira. So hopefully that's what you're expecting to hear. We'll go ahead and get this going. So today's agenda, we're going to talk briefly about what is Kanban. What are the core practices of Kanban? So before we start talking about tooling, us Agilists always like to think about, sort of what are the thought processes behind the ways that we want to work before we start getting infatuated with tools, but we'll cover both of them. But before we get into Jira, we're going to talk about the core practices of Kanban, and then we'll weave into that how we get started with Kanban using Jira. How do we use Jira to leverage the Kanban approach most effectively? And then we'll talk a little bit about what reports are available out of the box with Jira to manage our work using Kanban. And then some suggested next steps for moving forward with Kanban and Jira together. Like I say, like PB and J. So hopefully that reference works. If not, whatever combo you like, Starsky and Hutch, I'm not sure what reference. But anyway, with that, and then we'll do some Q&A at the end of it. So that's our agenda today. And with that, we'll start talking about what is Kanban. And Cate, you're up.
All right. So as you can see here on the slide, Kanban is just the Japanese word for signal. And so we use Kanban and visual signals to signify various things. So on here on the slide, we have a very simple workflow, software-centric, doesn't have to be software-centric, just showing cards moving from left to right, where it's through the flow of work. So backlog, in progress, testing, UAT, and done. In this example, we're using priorities being signified by being at the top of the column, not a requirement with Kanban, but it's a common use as that's how we do it in Scrum. So it's an easy transition from Scrum to Kanban to have your priority at the top. And we use it also to visualize bottlenecks. So as you can see, we highlighted the testing column here, and that's showing us that maybe we have a little buildup in testing. So all of this is to just give a visual display of what's going on. The goal is to have as simple as possible view for everyone on the team to be able to glance at the board and quickly know what's going on and what they should be focusing on. So Kanban is based on lean principles. So defining value, which means understanding what your customer wants, focusing on value for them, mapping the value stream, the flow of value to your customer, how does the customer journey happen from beginning to end throughout your organization, creating that flow, establishing a pull system to maintain that flow, and then the consistent pursuit of perfection. So everyone working together, continuously making the process better. And all of this is around improving workplace efficiency and a fundamental respect for people. It's a people-driven process. So we'll go into each of these in a little bit more detail throughout the rest of the presentation, but in its simplest form, as I just talked about, Kanban is a visualization tool. We use practices like limiting work in progress, managing the flow, making the policies explicit, having feedback loops, and improving collaboratively. So now we'll dive in
to how we actually incorporate that in Jira. So here's our tag team. So Cate's going to tap me in.
Yes.
We'll do this together though. So Kanban and Jira. So most of you, even if you don't actively use it, you're likely familiar with Jira. It has become the de facto standard. Hopefully I'm not picking any fights with anybody right now. If you've got another tool that you love, so be it. What we talk about today can be done in most other tools, but Jira as the de facto choice these days, and also because there's a free version for those of you who don't have it and want to get started. The barrier to entry is nil, and that's important. So we're going to talk about Jira, but again, if you're using something else, these same concepts apply. So you don't have to have that as a prerequisite if you have another tool in place. So Jira helps team plan, assign, track, report, and manage work. This next bullet point for those of you who aren't using Jira and even those who have. So I started using Jira back when dinosaurs roamed the earth, and there were no real effective agile management tools. Some of you may argue today that there still are none. We'll set that aside for a different live stream. But because it started as a bug tracking system, there's some residual language in it that you may bump into. And so that's why I like to call this out. It started as a bug tracking system. So when you hear things like projects as a construct or issues as a construct, understand that that's language that came from its origins. And so Your project in Jira may be a product, et cetera. Don't get stuck on the language, but just be aware that when you bump into some of those things, calling something an issue, it can be a story, it can be an epic, et cetera. We don't go deep on that today, but it is something, if you haven't used Jira or if you've always wondered if you are using Jira, that's something that just to be cognizant of, because it can be a little bit odd in the beginning sometimes. So Jira is also really good, and it may not be a big draw for those of you today, but in the someday department and in future work for you and your teams, Jira is also really good, and I think now the de facto choice because it's got such a good ecosystem, but it integrates really well with collaboration tools, wiki tools. It has its own Confluence, same vendor, DevOps and CI/CD tools. So it's a great system to use as far as managing all of your work. And thankfully, we'll be talking about almost none of that today because we're going to really start with the basics. So this may be old hat to some of you, but we really want those of you who've never used Jira before, if you want to get working today, we want you to be able to get working today. So creating a project in Jira, as I mentioned, there's a free version. If you already have one installed at your company, you probably shouldn't go get a new account set up with the free version. Talk to your administrator. But if you don't, or if you just want to start experimenting, you can go to Atlassian site and set up a free account. I think it's 5 user constraints, but it's actually functional. It's not really hamstrung that way. Creating a project in Jira, you can go ahead. You can see the screen cap here. It's as simple as once you get in, you create a project. Again, a project in their parlance doesn't have to be a project. It can be a product. It can be a whatever you want it to be, but Jira will always refer to that as a project. So just don't worry about the language. Anything that you want to have its own sort of entity for at the highest level is a project in Jira. When you click on that first button that you saw on the prior screen, you'll have some options. Jira has made this so much easier than it used to be. And that's one of the other reasons that we like it. You just click the Kanban option. And you don't have to pull up the deck for the slide. I think you'll probably remember when you click new and then choose Kanban because it's all about Kanban and Jira. When you do that, you'll see a couple of options. Now, these may vary a little bit. If you're using the free version, you won't get a company managed option. Don't worry about that. When you go in, it's pretty intuitive and straightforward, but you'll add some information to create that project. We chose Kanban. You give it a name. And then we can actually start using it. So in less time than this excessively verbose guy, myself, spent on talking through that, you could have actually, and some of you may have done this while I was talking, created a new project in Jira. And that's great because, again, we want to just get started and then we improve over time. That's a key principle for us. So now that we've got this project and we start getting our work in there, now we can move on to visualizing that work. And I don't know, Cate, you and I can tag team on this, but as we visualize work, you saw in Cate's prior examples. So now that we've got that construct and we've got that Kanban board, we're going to incorporate what Cate talked about, and we're going to make that manifest on the board itself. But before we start with a tool, and this is just an overarching principle here, but you've probably heard it before and you probably apply it. Before we start messing with the tools, we want to think about whether you use pen and paper or otherwise whiteboard. Think about what are the steps in your process today. And I add a caveat of, or what are the steps that you would like to have in a near-term process? Not idealized, but if you know you do something today that you don't want to perpetuate, I would suggest not building that in. But don't over-engineer it. Start with where you are because you can evolve. See. So, and as Cate mentioned, after we've identified those steps, we want to map the current work items in progress to our process steps that Cate had identified. Again, the example that she gave was based on software development. But once you think about what your process is in those different workflow states or statuses, that's what we would be building out. And then, as you see in bullet point or item 3, prioritizing the items in each of these steps by putting the most important item at the top of the column. So again, we talk about this in the context of Jira. You can use any tool, but if you're using Jira, literally selecting those cards or those little rectangles, which are analogous to what cards used to be or sticky notes for us from the olden days, literally dragging them up and down based on the relative priority, as Cate had mentioned. The board telegraphs that signal that the stuff that's higher up on the top is of priority. So
one thing I want to add as a caveat, all of these screenshots here are Jira Cloud and a team managed project. You may have a different instance. There's a couple. So if you have Jira Server, you have company managed projects, you might not have exactly the same options that we're showing you here, but you have about 80 to 90% of what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So as John just described in the Jira board layout, we've on the left-hand side, you see we've just selected a project, clicked on board. Because it was already created as a Kanban project, this board is here for us. If you click on the ellipses on the top right that are highlighted, we can go in and map each of the statuses to the columns that we have here. You may not have permissions to edit this workflow. You may have to work with the workflow that you have. All of that depends on the policies within your company. But you'll always be able to view so you understand how it's being utilized.
Yeah. And so to Cate's point, if you're working within an organization that already has Jira, you'll want to work with that team. But to Cate's point, you can see what these columns are, these different workflow states, and you may have to request of somebody else to add or change a workflow state. If you're doing the free version, the cloud version, you can do all of this on your own. But again, the concepts and the constructs apply either way. Start with where you are with what you have and then evolve. Don't let, when I say zero barrier to entry, that's one of the reasons that we like Jira as part of this example is not only is it ubiquitous, but you can get access to it effectively immediately. So the tool doesn't become the constraint of starting to improve how you work. So the next of Cate, she talked about the 6 key principles and practices of Kanban. The next one is limiting work in progress. So now that we've got a board and we've got those column states, we want to talk about how we limit our work explicitly through this board.
As John just said, with Kanban, we limit the work that we have in progress so that we can make sure that there's a continuous flow. We have in Jira, you have the opportunity on that same view we showed a few slides ago, you can edit the WIP limit that you use for each of these columns. And what you're doing is you're saying this is the maximum number of items that can happen in each one of these states. And the way you start by experimenting. As a team, you can agree with what starting numbers you want. On the slide, I put 3, 2, and 3.
Because you're an optimist.
Yes. But the goal is to really have each person working on one thing at a time so they move through as quickly as possible. In a purist Kanban world, you would also have a WIP limit for the whole team to sort of, again, enable people to swarm when something's getting blocked, doing all of these kind of optimizations. Jira does not support that, but you can still get pretty far with just the column WIP limits.
Yeah. And Cate's highlight, and you can tell that it's important because it's about 20-point type. It's bolded and italicized and underlined, and we may want to make it purple or as well. Like if you're not enforcing WIP limits with whatever tool you have, you're not doing Kanban. And this is coming from somebody that when I first started my journey many, decades ago, I thought that having a Kanban board was effectively doing Kanban. That's a board that basically reflects the fact that getting Taz clapping. Yeah. So just having a Kanban board is where a lot of people stop rather than where they start. And it only works if we do, as Cate mentions, a key principle of Kanban is that we're limiting our work in progress. So not only do you want to configure the board to have those WIP limits, but I've also seen teams that just blow right past them like Californians and stop signs. It's just one of those things that you really want to actually adhere to. And I know this is largely East Coast, so maybe nobody gets that reference, but we don't generally stop at stop signs. But Cate's example, as far as the WIP limits we have here, so she talked about the columns, but her point I couldn't agree with more. With new teams especially, it's like with any other metric, until you know what the numbers are, don't set goals. You have to baseline them first, and then you can start suggesting ways thoughtfully. Otherwise, you're going to do a WIP limit of 1, and then everyone's going to ignore it because you'll never be able to adhere to it. So start assessing what you've got today and then make incremental changes. So as far as the board layout, Cate had just alluded to this. So mechanically, again, we're bouncing back and forth by design between these Kanban principles and practices. And now we're going to talk about mechanically how you incorporate that into the board. And as Cate had mentioned, it's simply a matter of going to those same workflow statuses that you see, that little pencil there. When you click on that edit column, you just put the maximum number that's in there. Now, just so everyone knows, That doesn't suddenly stop the presses. It doesn't stop anything from happening. You can still overload that thing to whatever number you'd like. What does happen though is there's a visual indicator in Jira. Any column that is exceeded its WIP limits lights up in a red-green colorblind, but I've been told it's red. It's definitely different and it's definitely noticeable. So it's an indicator for the team to see that we violated those WIP limits. And then the question is, what do you do with it? Back to the tool's not going to force you to change. The tool's going to put a mirror to your process. You still have to decide what to do with what you see in the mirror. From that, managing flow.
So the goal of implementing a Kanban system, as we've been discussing, is to create a smooth and consistent flow. And we're using the board to visualize, as we've been discussing, the work in progress and identifying bottlenecks. And the goal is, as a team, just as John just alluded to, you're working together to remove those bottlenecks, whether you're exceeding the WIP limit or not. You're going to notice if things keep piling up here, you should be working together as a team to remove those items. So you do that. The first way you do it, we're just showing the board here.
Right.
Just even in just the daily stand-up, you'll start to get muscle memory around.
Right. Looking at the items, and there's some other things, and they're not reflected here. Again, we don't want to overwhelm all of you with all of the different things you can do, right? Otherwise, you'll try to do them all at once, and that doesn't end up working out well. But ultimately, once you have what's in place, what Cate had just talked about here, there's some other things that you can do in Jira, like you can put the creation date or aging or some other things on these cards to help see if we do have a problem with flow. So start with the basics. That's the major message for today, both principles and execution as far as the tool. But once you do that, continue to evolve. And there's ways to tune this board that will help provide you and the team with additional information immediately, so you can get some additional context around these items to help with managing flow.
Right. And so to John's point, moving on with making policies explicit as part of our Kanban flow, we want to start very simple. You can definitely over-engineer how this is managed in Jira, but you can start by just having a team working agreement on what you do, what you're allowed to do to move something from step 1 to step 2 to step 3. As we keep mentioning, we have a software workflow up here, but it could be any workflow that makes sense for your purposes. But again, one of the key points again is this visual system where the team has a shared understanding of what's going on. And so if everybody agrees and understands to go to step A to step B, you know, by looking at the board, what's going on based on these pieces of information.
Right. And to Cate's point, right, these are development examples, but for those of you who may be in technical operations teams or on any operations teams completely outside of technology, if you pause for a minute, throw the tool to the side for a minute, what Cate's talking about in the policies explicit, what are the implicit understandings that you have with others on your team or who interact with your team, your stakeholders, your customers, your partners, whatever other, what are the implicit agreements that you have about when we hand something off? And then work backwards from there and make those explicit. It's really taking the implicit. I assume this. Cate assumes that. We worked on this deck together. We made some assumptions a month ago or so. We learned from those assumptions because some of them weren't exactly aligned. Making them explicit really helps with efficiency, effectiveness, and also not bouncing things or not letting things sit in the wrong state because people are misaligned on their assumptions about how we do this handshake. Not really a handoff, but what's the handshake? How do we work together most effectively? Making process policies explicit is absolutely essential, and the tool can help with that.
And one thing I like to share as an example for this particular one is on many of the Kanban teams I've been on, the first one that is an open question is when something moves from in progress to testing, does the developer just move it to testing to mean it's ready for test, but it's not in QA, or does it mean it's actually available for the tester? And so that is usually a very exciting nuance that we work through pretty early on. Right. But again, it's a shared understanding.
Right. I'm ready to test it. I tested it. It still fails. Oh, we haven't updated the code in that environment to test. Exactly. Both sides assumed something different. Both were right and wrong at the same time. So this helps with that explicit understanding. And so what Cate, I don't know if you want to talk some more through this, but the team working agreement, some of you may have that or at least be familiar with that construct. Definition of ready, definition of done as well will help inform these things.
Right. So all I'm trying to say on this slide is you can just have a team working agreement, which is usually obviously external to Jira. Maybe it's on Confluence, however you want it documented, or you can go into the Jira workflow and have custom fields that have to have a value in them before, or a certain value in them before you move from step A to step B. But in our starting simple, it's usually just a team working agreement.
Yeah, start. We'll keep saying that over and over again. The audience that we expect, and I know some of you are absolutely experts, and so thanks for hanging out anyway. But for those of you who are just getting started, start simple and evolve. Right. Implementing feedback loops, another key principle in practice.
So some of these you'll recognize from a Scrum, if you have a Scrum background. Daily stand-ups, retros, and demos are all great feedback loops. They are not prescribed by Kanban, but they're often adopted by Kanban teams. And then also, and John's going to walk you through in wonderful detail some of the charts and reports that are available, but you can use average lead time and cycle time are great ways to sort of measure the flow of work and things to focus on as a team for where areas of improvement.
I'm not sure that I'll live up to wonderful, but I think hopefully they'll be slightly above average. How's that? We'll see what we can do. All right. But as far as the feedback loops and also improving collaboratively, well, and this will then get us into the metrics piece, but as far as improving collaboratively.
Yep. So it's just like all things in the agile space, it's just a commitment to relentless improvement, working on improving your process, improving your products.
Right.
Yourselves.
Using improving collaboratively and the idea of continuous, relentless improvement, we need metrics to do that, right? Having a board makes things transparent and visible, but it's a snapshot in time. And it could be good or bad at a given moment's notice. So we need to be able to slice and dice that data in different ways for it to be useful. So I'm going to go through, I often say this is not intended to either be exhaustive or exhausting. So we'll see if I can hit both of those notes at the same time. Before you get started with metrics, and this isn't Agile specific, this is my very strongly held perspective on metrics. Here's some things that I would suggest that you not do. Don't game or cheat any metrics that you see, right? They're not vanity metrics. We really want to use them as a diagnostic. When I got my first Fitbit, I found that if I put it on my ankle, I get more steps. That doesn't really gain anything other than I won a contest for the number of steps, but it was artificial. Don't game the system with your metrics. Never allow metrics to be weaponized by the team. So especially if you're not measuring things today, you'll start getting some data that folks may feel or may actively be singled out. Hey, why is person A, have so much stuff that is work in progress versus don't allow the data to be weaponized against the teams. It's not a sport. We're not trying to get a high score or a low score. It's data, it's context, it's objective. But we really never want it to be weaponized against team members. I hate stretch goals. I think they're demoralizing. So I strongly suggest that, when you start looking at it, hey, our WIP limits we talked about earlier, we've got 20 things that are in WIP today. Let's get that down to 5 by tomorrow. No, that is going to demoralize people, and you'll either cheat or you'll fail, and this will all be for naught. So don't start with stretch goals. And then never forget the context, right? This is a diagnostic. It's like going to the doctor and getting your blood pressure reading. If it's not where you'd like it to be, it's context for a conversation, but it doesn't tell you exactly what you need to fix or what's causing that. So those are some don'ts. Some do's that I would strongly suggest. Use that data within the team to quantitatively validate decisions and projections. One of the great things about starting to work this way and then starting to have some data, and once you've got a large enough data set over a broad enough period of time, you can extrapolate from it like you do with Scrum and being able to understand velocity. There's other constructs where you can say, we got X amount of Y done over Z period. Therefore, this new thing that's coming along that is, twice that amount of whatever, we can extrapolate from that. And we won't be 100% accurate, nor is that the goal, but it'll at least be based on something more than my gut. Do use these metrics, as I think Cate had alluded to, as part of this idea of continuous improvement and reflection and improving collaboratively. We want to share this data with the team to assess our say-do completion ratio. So that's explicit in Scrum in terms of what we committed to versus what we delivered. But it's likely that all of you are making commitments on what you're going to deliver by a particular date and a particular scope, et cetera, irrespective of framework and approach. So use that data to set reasonable expectations. Always have counterbalancing metrics. So this is really key. My example is always in the dev world, which is if you say we need to get more story points done if you're using Scrum, or we need to finish a particular effort by a particular date, what normally goes out the window? Best case scenario documentation. Generally, it's tech debt gets created. We make trade-offs if we don't have counterbalancing metrics. So if I say we want to look at how much we're getting done over a particular period of time in terms of what we're delivering, have a counterbalancing metric of something like quality so that you don't have escape defects as a unpleasant byproduct of getting more work through the pipe more quickly. The corollary, if that's the right word, to the don't, as far as this is the do, set realistic and valuable goals to metric improvement. So one, make sure the goals are realistic, but two, make sure that you're moving needles that you care about. Those of you that are familiar with Mick Kirsten and vanity metrics, how many people got trained on Scrum at Nokia? Does anyone really care other than maybe the people who do the certs? That training is not unimportant. It is essentially important, but it is a means to an end, not the end. So that metric for certain folks could be useful. From an organizational perspective, what we care is about what are the outcomes from that training. The training was a means to an end, but let's measure the end, and that is an intermediary metric, but that is not the end all be all of assessing how well we're doing. And then again, another corollary to what I brought up earlier, baseline metrics before proposing goals. That's a really good way. And it's also a great way to get all of the team involved to say, what is a reasonable improvement over what period of time for what metric, and how do we as a team make that happen? And then this last point, just always remember that these metrics are primarily about the team and for the team to help objective improvement in all we do. And if we're doing well at the team level, if we're doing the right things at the team level, that cascades upwards to delivery efficiency, effectiveness, customer focus, all the things that the executive teams and customers care about. If we do this right, that cascades positively upwards. Cate, anything to add to that slide?
Nope, we've got lots of questions when we're through here.
Okay. So I'll go through this quickly and then we'll do the questions. So some potentially useful reports. And again, all of this sort of presupposes that you have a reasonable amount of data. So you can use these immediately. They're not going to be super helpful until you actually start using Kanban for a period of time. So you can look at them, but again, they're not going to be useful until you start using Kanban consistently. And then you've got enough data to start looking for patterns and trends. So with that, what I'll show you is what is available out of the proverbial box or out of the cloud in Jira. This is available on the reports tab. So Jira's got a variety of reports that are available to use. I'm not going to go through all of them, so you're welcome. I will just, in the interest of time, we won't have time to go through all of them anyway, but start with the basics. Cumulative flow, this one can be a little bit dense and intense, but is really useful. The control chart as well. Resolution time is one that any team can use immediately, and that one's pretty darn intuitive. Average age, same thing. Created versus resolved. These last three bullet points, just by their label, you can tell what they do. Pretty straightforward. And we'll go through them. So the first two of these, you may not want to start with them the first day. Start with we'll talk about these two that are a little bit more interactive than the last three bullet points I talked about. So we're still putting this in here, and that this is incredibly valuable, especially with Kanban teams. So cumulative flow is simply a report that shows the status of issues. Again, back to Jira parlance. So just consider issues to be items, things, the status of those things over time. But as Cate had talked about in terms of Kanban, and a key principle is this idea of flow, and also flow only happens if we are limiting our work in progress. So this helps us understand quantitatively and objectively where we might have bottlenecks that are impacting the flow of our work. Out of the box, this can be sort of overwhelming. Hey, there's a lot of things going on. It looks like a can of Skittles exploded. But with a little bit of filtering, you can see here in these different columns what Cate was talking about, those different workflow states. So you'll see a column aligned to whatever you created in Jira as far as those workflow columns. I've got 5, 6, 7 here based on that real board. But what Cate was showing, I think there's 5 or so columns. So that would be right here. And you can filter out backlog and done, which is my suggestion. If you're going to use this, if you filter out for most starting points in using cumulative flow diagram, filter out backlog and done, and this is the same data set left to right, you can start to see the distribution over time of where our work is, the entirety of where our work, right? Basically the same thing as a stacked bar chart. But within that, what is the subset of those workflow states at any given point in time? So you can see a snapshot in time of our work distribution by status, but you can also see where that trending is. I think the green is analysis. Again, I'm red-green colorblind, so if you are as well, enjoy. Jira's a little bit fun because they like to use red and green a lot. But you can tell that there are different colors here that align to these different areas. And if I see growth or contraction in a particular area at a particular point in time, that's always interesting to me. I always look for the trends and the patterns rather than the instances. Cate, anything else that you'd like to add to this one?
No, that's great. And the other thing I would add is where you see those step changes, that's showing you either a big addition in one area or a big drop in one area, which means you probably don't have a good flow. It's a big batch just entered or a big batch just exited, and we're going to want to look into why that is.
Exactly. And what Cate just said, again, that's going to be the same rinse and repeat sort of muscle memory type thing. What's the context? This just tells you questions that you can start asking. It doesn't answer them, but it's really awesome to be able to know where to start looking rather than just saying, hey, we're taking too long to get stuff done, throw up our hands and hire more people. Which is not as unusual as you might think, not even being sarcastic as much as I'd like to be. So created versus resolved. Now, this one, again, just based on its name, is pretty straightforward. It's just open, close trending. So it's telling us whether we're keeping up with requests created for the team. Really quickly, I've been told that this is green. So I'm looking at this funnel, and that's not awful. But in the last year, this particular team got to a point where their ratio was about the same, and they're actually improving. So if this is indeed green, and it looks like it is, they're actually resolving more than they got created. And so as a manager, don't go out and go, oh, hey, you got capacity. Same idea, even when the data is good. The question is, hey, we're doing great. We're getting more done than we did. Does that mean we have excess capacity? We take on something else? Does that mean we have excess capacity and we should spend some time on learning and development, documentation, addressing tech debt? Or does it simply say this was anomalous? Whatever the case may be, ask the questions. It doesn't tell you what to do. It doesn't even tell you why it happened. But it says there's a pattern that's emerging here. Let's ask some questions and see what's going on. And then once we understand what's driving it, then we can start to decide, back to that Kanban principle, we want to continuously be improving. We want to improve as a team. Let's talk about what we can do. Hey, we got some bandwidth. What do we do with that? What's the best investment of that? Again, look for trends more than instances. If there's an expanding gap that's red, we're not keeping up with our work. Same thing, even when it's negative, same thing. What's driving this? Is it anomalous? Is it a pattern? And then what do we do about it? It doesn't tell you how to answer that, but it tells you what questions to start asking. It can indicate issues with efficiency, throughput, could be team capacity, but just don't jump into that. Don't just say, hey, we're not keeping up with it. Go hire somebody. There can be, innumerable ways to address that problem once you understand what it is. Resolution time, again, pretty basic as far as what it describes. So it tells us for stuff that we've gotten across the line, how long did that take from the moment that it got created to the moment it got done? Customers don't care. All of our 85 workflow states in the middle, they know when they gave us something. They know when they got something in their hands that addressed what they asked for. The proverbial sausage making process in the middle, not super interesting to most customers. They just want their stuff. So this helps us understand from beginning to end in the aggregate, how long did that take to be completed? In this instance, in this screen cap, you can see that it's really spiky. Don't know if that's good or bad. It's anomalous. So I'm going to ask some questions. Hey, what happened on the 1st of September? Why did our resolution time spike? I actually know why this is. And it actually was a good thing, not a bad thing. This team got a whole bunch of stuff that was in their backlog. They finally got it done. So the fact that their time went up dramatically, counterintuitively, is a good thing, not a bad thing, because it means they pushed a whole bunch of stuff out. But it's average age. If it was sitting for 2 years, that's part of the average age calculation. Ask the questions, consider the context. In Jira, you configure the time period. So for team level stuff, I normally look at weeks or months. For executive level stuff, I'm more zooming out and looking at the year based on monthly. So Jira will let you slice and dice the same data set, but what I'm looking at with the teams is going to be a lot closer as far as perspective than the broader range of view at the executive or enterprise level. Same data set, just sliced and diced differently.
And this is particularly useful in a Kanban context because not all Kanban teams use story points or estimation. So you can use resolution time or average resolution time or cycle time to determine when things are likely to be done.
Right. Yeah. And again, and the other benefit is it's intuitive to everybody. I share that with executives. Mm-hmm. Everybody can understand, like control charts and stuff can be overwhelming and they hurt your eyes. Open, close, resolution time, and aging. Everyone can wrap their head around that. It doesn't have to involve technology at all. Propose next steps. So just, and this is very mechanical, but this will get you started if you want today. I sound like an infomercial. Get a free account with Atlassian if you don't have one today. I have one set up for my household, and I actually manage with Kanban 3 different projects for homework home space work that I do, including chores and stuff like that. Again, barrier to entry is low, basically nil. So get a free account if you don't have one today. If you do have Jira in your organization, and if you're part of an organization that is unhappy when you start installing or using software that you're not supposed to or messing with theirs, you may want to run that by the folks who are your admins. But in some cases, like Cate said, without doing any harm to any other projects or things, if you have access to a project, in most constructs of Jira, you can create your own board. And it's just a different construct, doesn't mess with anything that the team has today. It's an additional item that you can use and share with others. So you can use different boards against the same data set without causing any problems. And that's a great way to experiment. Just realize when you move a card on your new Just You board, it actually will update the status in the project itself. So suggest working with your Jira Atlassian admin if you're using a shared instance. Once you've got that set up, however you did it, set up that project and choose Kanban, as Cate showed, as the template type. Determine which workflow states are aligned to how you work or want to work today. And again, the caveat on want to work, as I had mentioned, don't rebuild something that you want to get rid of immediately, but also don't over-engineer what your board is going to be. Hey, we should have this and have this. Again, we want to continuously iterate. So start simple and evolve based on real actual use, just like any other product that we'd be building. Then get the team trained with the basics on using Kanban in Jira. And that may be just showing them this video. And so everyone gets up to speed on the basics. It's really, we want that barrier to entry to be nil. Once you've got that done though, the main thing is actually just doing it, to steal from our friends at Nike. Start getting your work captured in Jira. So it doesn't have to be super detailed, but every work item that you have, this only works if you start tracking all of your meaningful work there. Use those out of the box reports. So again, reports aren't super useful at all, even a little bit without data in them. So once you start working though, you'll start being able to use those reports that we just reviewed. And again, we don't want to just say, oh, great, we've got tools, great, we've got a board. The whole idea here is to make us more efficient, more effective, more collaborative, have more clarity. So once you've started doing this for a while, as Cate mentioned earlier on, and it's part of that in improving continuously and collaboratively and reflecting, have a retrospective with the team and talk about what changes you want to make. And if you do monthly retros or weekly or whateverly, use that as an opportunity to say, how can we tune our process? Make those little tiny tweaks as you start using this. You'll find things that you want to change, but just do that iteratively overall. And then always, make sure that every time you do this, retrospectives are worse than nothing. They're worse than not having them at all if you don't take action on what you found. So when you do this, pick some items that are prioritized by the team and say, yeah, in the next month or the next whatever, we're going to incorporate these changes to our board, to our process, to how we're doing this work, and just keep doing that. And you'll be good.